Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe button. And check out the other videos on this channel. Tell all your friends about it if you enjoy them. Hi everybody, it's me, Brian D. Anderson, and here is another edition after a 2-week hiatus thanks to a hurricane of After the Con. Right now I have with me Mr. Christopher Paolini, Mr. Aragon himself. And also joining us in just a little bit is going to be Mr. Savile, and he wrote for Pathfinder Warhammer. You know, he was with me on the Akiri series, and so there, and he wrote for Sherlock Holmes franchise, Doctor Who franchise, and we got Mr. Paolini's book, To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. It's just out through Tor Books. We are publisher mates. Anyway, why don't you tell everybody real quick what you got going on these days, and we will just take it from there.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on to talk about stuff. This whole virtual tour thing has definitely taken some getting used to. As you had a book coming out at the beginning of this year, so you were just saying your release basically got shut down like a week after the book came out, or your tour got shut down.
Yeah, oh yeah. I was with the Barge Tower, what we were just talking about before we went live, and we had 17 cities we were going to, and I had some health issues. I had to have an operation that did not go well, and so that would have shut down half of it anyway. But still, I missed. I was supposed to be first time as a attending professional at Dragon Con. That got,
yeah, that's a pity. It's hard too, because at least for authors, my experience has been that the conventions are how we connect in person, because we all live in different places, and it's a pretty solitary profession. You sit in your room and you stare at your computer, your typewriter, your piece of paper, whatever, and every maybe 2 or 3 years, or every 1 year if you're Brandon Sanderson, you go out touring with your new book, and you go to the conventions and you get to say hi to, I have authors I consider friends, and I literally only see them once every 3 years or so. And it's like, and we're doing exactly what we're doing now, which is, go sit down at the bar in the lobby or the restaurant and, talk nonstop, because this is finally our opportunity to catch up and,
like a release valve being let, yeah.
Yeah. In fact, that's why I started going to conventions in the first place. I'd had all of this success with the Aragon series, but I was completely disconnected from the author community, and especially from the sci-fi fantasy community. The only times I've been to cons had been, for these really big official events. I go and I do my thing and then I leave, and that was it. So after the fourth book, Inheritance, came out, I started going to conventions sort of on my own, and that was a really good experience. I'm really glad I did that.
Well, you were barely young enough to go on your own when the hair got started.
Yeah, there's some truth in that. So anyway, what have I got going on? Well, my newest book came out on the 15th of September. That's To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I have a hardcover right here, and Tor did a beautiful job with the cover. Yeah. Really catches the light. Has these gorgeous end papers also.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah, and there are illustrations all throughout the book.
Oh, neat.
So it's a big old space opera full of spaceships, alien planets, adventure, heartache, lasers, explosions, and of course, tentacles.
How's that been for you, like that transition? I know a few friends of mine have tried that, like Mitch Hogan. You familiar with Mitch?
I know the name.
He tried to dive off into science fiction coming out of fantasy, and he had a rough time of it. It didn't, I know a couple of other fantasy guys that, cause they tie fantasy and sci-fi so closely together. They just haven't been able to. Some of them have, some of them made the transition. But did you find it? How did it go for you?
Well, I feel like to answer that properly, like give me another year and then I can answer that properly. Let's see how the book does. I'd say that part of that is due to the market itself. As I just my agent and I discovered, and my agent knew this, but we really saw this in sort of uh, saw this in person as we were taking the book around. The sci-fi market, for whatever reason, has not done as well as the fantasy market for the past 10, 15 years. Now that was
It has a
reversed
lot to do with Lord of the Rings movies and shit like that, you know.
in Harry Potter
Harry
and
Potter, yeah.
Aragon and yeah. Um, I mean, that was reversed in the 90s. I mean, back in the 90s, science fiction was the big seller. And then it's kind of, well, and Game of Thrones was part of the reversal. So, so yeah, I mean, I think the publishers haven't known what to do with science fiction to a degree, and it hasn't sold.
Well, you got the Expanse, that's done so
Yep.
well, and you got a few. You're starting to see a rise of that type of stuff compared to what, and it's done right. I mean, the Expanse to
Yeah.
me is, I mean, I love the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica. I absolutely adored it, but the Expanse took that whole thing to a. It had the modern sensibilities, but without being over the top with being, it was political without being ham-fisted.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The funny thing is, I went back and started rewatching the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, and what kind of shocked me was how dated the special effects look. I mean, they're not bad. They're not
No.
bad. I mean, the spaceships look good, the Cylons look good, all of this.
like
But
playing Final Fantasy X,
it's amazing how far they've come since then. I mean, like the Expanse looks better than plenty of movies from the 90s or even the
Yeah.
early 2000s. It's amazing how far it's come. I mean, the effects in the Expanse are better than the original Star Wars films.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, I can still watch the original Star Wars film, and I can still see. I mean, I can see how cheesy the effects are compared to today, but you can also see, as long as you have the knowledge of a lack of CGI, you can see how much work went
Oh
into
yeah.
that. Oh my God, just the
Well,
models, just making that shit. That must have been just a nightmare. I guess maybe fun and a nightmare at the same time. I don't know.
I mean, it comes down to the writing. If the story's good, the characters are good, you can put up with the bad effects.
Sure the hell wasn't the dialogue.
Yeah.
I love George Lucas, but damn. Sometimes it's like, wow. Oh, and it didn't get better. I actually like when I remember going and seeing the Phantom Menace when it came out, and I remember everybody walking out of the theater like disappointed, and I'm like, and I felt it myself. I mean, to me, it was just fine. I enjoyed it. It was they had got to see Jedi actually fight like you imagine a Jedi would.
Yeah.
You got to see some cool stuff. But I figured out what was wrong with it, and pretty quickly. The one thing they didn't have was any love interest whatsoever. You had a 10-year-old boy and a 16-year-old Padme, so they couldn't have that eventually was going to happen. But
I was at a convention. I think it was MizCon, and Jim Butcher was there, and Kevin Anderson, and a whole bunch of other people. And
Kevin's awesome, by the way. Yeah, I love Kevin.
yeah, and so we were all in the lobby after the events, and we spent 45 minutes dissecting the prequel movies and going into exactly what we thought should have been done differently. And I think for me, ultimately, the problem was it was schizophrenic especially the first film, in the sense that the first film either should have committed to making Qui-Gon Jinn or Obi-Wan Kenobi the main character for the prequel trilogy, or
Yeah.
and this would have been my preference. They should have just dumped the first film and started the first film with Anakin already a teenager, but having been raised a slave. And then the middle film is everything that they skipped, where he's getting trained with Obi-Wan and having all these adventures, and the conflict between them grows. Because that first film, if you start with him as a slave and as a teenager, you have all the groundwork laid for his anger, his rage, his frustration, his desire for power, which he's been denied until this point. And of course, it's a very adolescent desire to break free of your bonds and
Well,
to
they made
gain
the
control.
Jedi celibate. I mean, that was a stupid move. if you ask me, making the Jedi celibate was a dumb move. You know, I mean, there was no reason for that. I mean, just by a single thing they could have done better. They could have had Qui-Gon Jinn have a romantic interest in Anakin's mother.
Yeah.
I mean, you would have had to rewrite it a bit, but you know what I mean, it would have made, even if you didn't have them hooking up, it would have been, you know, you had that sort of interest. And shit that didn't make any sense. You know what I mean?
You're not a fan of mitochondrias?
Yeah, well, that.
No, not mitochondria. I can't remember. I'm mispronouncing things.
Midichlorians.
Midichlorians, there it is.
Mitochondria is an actual thing.
That's right, it's the powerhouse of the cell. I haven't finished my second coffee for the day, so.
Where are you out of right now?
I'm in Montana. This is where I grew up and where I still live. But beautiful place, but we actually have been suffering some pretty bad wildfire smoke ever since the fires in California, and then the fires come up and sort of sit here. So every once in a while we get a blast of winter weather and it pushes it south again, which is nice. But yeah, it's beautiful, but it's bad. I remember being on tour a couple of times, and I'd leave Montana, go to New York City, and I'm like, it's bad when New York City has better air quality than Montana.
All right, or LA or something like that.
So.
I have family that grew up near Great Falls, and they most of them are in like Colorado and other places now. I think one or two of my cousins are still somewhere in Montana. Well, I don't have so much a family as we're more like a litter. We're born and we, you know, just sort of, as soon as we get old enough to leave, we do.
Yeah, I have family scattered all over the country, so.
Yeah, man. Oh, by the way, your book, the Eldest, it was the only time I actually did something because of Eldest. Did something against my moral fiber, against my moral principles.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do tell.
I was waiting to get paid. This is just right before my career as a writer started doing well and I started making actual money, and I was broke as hell. And Eldest, I'd read the first book, and Eldest had come out. I didn't have the money for it, so I downloaded a pirated copy and read it. But I felt so guilty about it that I deleted it off my computer as soon as I finished it and went out and bought a copy. Even though I read the book.
As long as you bought a copy, that's what matters.
I felt like I was feeling like shit about it. I was like, man, I can't believe I did that. I shouldn't have done that. You know what I mean? And I'm an anti-pirating advocate. You know what I mean?
Same.
Especially, I have a friend of mine. She's an educator, Dorothy Zamak. She actually did I brought her over to a tour to do the copy editing for my books, but she worked for Macmillan Education and Pearson's and all that. She's well qualified, but she the pirating of textbooks is awful, and people they're expensive. But these authors these people who write these textbooks don't make as much as people think they do. You know,
no, I mean, it's a difficult situation because you definitely have situations where professors will, you know, they'll write a book and then they'll change one page in it per year and force every class to buy, you know, every semester you got to buy a new set of this book. And that's just, you know, you can't blame people for copying that. But in general, yeah. I mean, the amount of work that goes into
Hold on, I lost sound on you. No.
Let's see.
Shit.
Can you hear me?
Oh God, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Okay,
let me undo that. Oh crud! Everything's going off all at once. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, now I can hear you again. Okay. I have a good friend of mine, Tyson Lee. He's actually one of the board members, like for the boxing association, like in one of the national boxing associations. Really super nice guy, self-made millionaire. Went to West Point. He's trying to call me right now. I was like, oh shit, I forgot to turn my phone off.
It happens. I did an event one time. I was up on stage, and I was, I don't know, presenting this huge audience, and my cell phone goes off on stage.
Oh wow.
But and you know, I just you have to own it when that happens. I pulled it out. I looked at it, and I looked back at the audience. I said, "Well, it's my mom calling, so you know, you gotta give me this one."
Oh man.
But yeah, no, textbooks. I mean, the amount of work that goes into
Cruddy. I can't talk to you. I gotta shut that site down and that site down. There we go. Now that won't happen anymore.
All right. No worries. But yeah, I mean, the amount of work that goes into a textbook, especially if there are images and formatting and graphs and diagrams. I mean, it is the amount of work that even goes into a regular textbook is, especially a long one, is pretty immense. And you know, I mean, for most authors, if you're lucky enough to be a working author, that's what puts food on the table. So, yeah. You know, your pirating is literally stealing from someone.
Oh yeah. I ran up on one of my audiobooks that had like 150,000 views, and I'm like, yeah. That's a lot of money coming out of my pocket, man.
I mean, there's a counter argument that you know, those people never would have bought the book anyway. So you're getting exposure that you wouldn't. And there's probably some truth in that. I know Cory Doctorow.
Oh yeah, you're not going to stop these people from doing it. There's no. I mean, these are, you know, a thief's going to be a thief regardless, you know, and they're gonna find a way to do it. And but I love the literary communities, especially the fans that most readers who would like be a committed fan to an author won't do that.
No, you know? No. In general, it's not an issue. But I've heard some arguments that try to compare it to the music industry. But the difference with the music industry is that, you know, because record sales have completely plummeted, you know, CD sales and all of that. But the thing is musicians can make a living if they're popular by performing live. Authors can't. You know, no. The books are our performance. They are our live performance. And, you know, if we go do a reading or we go do a tour, we're not making money directly off of that. It's entirely, you know, it's not like we're selling, you know, tour T-shirts in the back of the event or something. I mean, you can, but you're not going to make a whole lot from that. So no. It really comes down to that.
Now, I've actually started doing some stuff. I'm getting some stuff up with Keith DiCandido, who we mentioned, I think before we got on air. But I'm going to be like doing some mentoring through my website. You know, I mean, just basically for another revenue stream, because you know this whole COVID thing has just taken a bat to everything I've been doing, and I told you that I had some health issues, and then the hurricane hit. Oh my God.
Now, where in the country are you?
I'm in Fairhope, Alabama. Imagine what if San Francisco had a love child with Mayberry.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
It really depends on how you. I mean, they don't fly the Confederate battle flag over anything, not because they wouldn't, but because it would be coarse and vulgar. And it would clash with the building. No, it's a kind of a artsy little bedroom community. We got a great little mom and pop bookstore, the Page and Palette, that's been around since the 1970s. They got all sorts of little authors groups. Winston Groom, who just passed away recently, he's from here. Rick Bragg, he lives in the area. Bunch of mostly lit. This place is mostly lit fic though, and you know how lit fic looks upon us genre writers.
Well, I think honestly, I think it's changed in the past. It used to be a lot worse in the 90s, I think. Yeah. And you know, there have been a lot of books that have sort of picked away at that, whether it's, you know, Margaret Atwood or Cormac McCarthy or George R. Martin, or, you know, pick your poison. I think there's so much good stuff out there.
Yeah, I love Martin. I really do. But I kept on saying these things, how brilliant a writer he was. And he isn't. No doubt about it, not taking anything away from him. But I'm looking over at what Piers Anthony, you know, and his skills, and Terry the late, it does bears mentioning that Terry Goodkind passed recently too.
Yeah.
And I know Kevin J. Anderson, he was good friends with Terry and is very sad about that. So my condolences to his family.
Well, I
But,
mean, there's been beautiful and very well written fiction in
yeah.
fantasy and science fiction going back to, the beginnings of the genre. So, but
What
honestly,
do
I
you
think,
think the beginnings was the real beginnings were? What do you think? Where are you on that?
well, if I'm really being pedantic, I'd say it's mythology. All of the oldest stories that we used to tell each other as humans are they're all fantasy.
So we're talking like Homer and stuff like that, right?
Bingo. I mean, the Odyssey is fantasy. I mean, it's classical literature. Macbeth is fantasy. Beowulf is fantasy. The Aeneid is fantasy. Hell, Don, Dante's Inferno, Dante's, the whole
Oh,
Paradise
yeah,
Lost
yeah.
sequence. It's
Paradise Lost.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
it's fan fiction. It's biblical fan
Biblical
fiction.
fanfic. Well, I mean, you can go even predating that. Well, I mean, not to get into religion, but we're talking about a long ass work of fiction. Of course, there was a chariot coming down from the sky. Of course, there was. But you can go beyond that into like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I think that's, as far as I know, one of the earliest ones that we have that's actually written. I mean, I think to me, I just keep going back to Tolkien, of course. I mean, because the only thing that I think the only way I think he hurt the genre was his story was so good, his writing was so good that I think everybody thought that's how you had to write. You know what
Well,
I
I
mean?
mean, it's interesting because you did have a competing thread of fantasy, which was sort of the sword and sorcery type of
Yeah.
fantasy. Like Fritz Lieber and Michael Moorcock and some of these others who were, not doing sort of the big high fantasy stuff at the same time. But it never caught on quite as much
No.
during that time.
It was it was ahead of its time, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, because now you got so many. I mean, our genre has grown in just ways that. I mean, just look at all the different authors. At the time, you had Anne McCaffrey, one or two female authors. Now there's as many female authors as there are male authors. You're having mythologies that are diving outside your traditional European Middle Ages type style. And what I love about it is that it's not displacing classic fantasy.
No, the genre is so much more varied now than when I started reading. It's awesome. I mean, I actually stopped reading fantasy for a while because I was kind of sick of the same old, same old. It's like, I've read this type of fantasy a million times, exaggerating, but you know what I mean. And it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
where's the new stuff? And there is so much new stuff nowadays. I'm a big believer in one of the reasons that fantasy and sci-fi have gotten so popular, especially fantasy, is honestly because of technology. I think that because of the computer graphics and stuff in movies.
Oh yeah, could you imagine trying to adapt The Lord of the Rings to film in the 1980s?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen, or very badly. You'd have to do it animated, and we know how that turned out.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, man. I can still watch it and but I get nostalgic. There's certain things I watch and I get nostalgic. Now, certain things I've read, like books. Do you remember Elfquest?
I never read it, but I know of it. Yeah.
Well, Playboy Publishing originally did it, and then it was taken over by Berkeley. And the novelized version. I had the comics and graphic novels too, but the novelized version. I saw it online, and this wave of nostalgia took me over. So I ordered a used mass market paperback online, and I'm like about 6 pages into it. I'm like, holy shit, this sucks. I'm like, how did this pass for I mean. Oh my God!
Well, I mean that's actually one of the downsides of so much quality nowadays is the standards are so much higher. I mean, like there are some very popular sci-fi fantasy novels from like let's say the 70s and earlier, and you go back and read them, and at least to me, it reads like a first draft. It's like if it were written nowadays, you'd get another level of editing, another couple of rounds, or the writing itself would be on a different level. And I just think with the competition and just all the conversation between all the authors, it's driven the whole genre, nothing but up.
One thing I've always liked, what I liked about your writing is something I do myself. Your writing's what I consider accessible. You know, I mean, obviously you're intelligent enough to have written at such a young age, you know, and you didn't lack the vocabulary, you know, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like trying to wade through Tolkien or even even Martin sometimes gets a little weighty, you know. I mean, that's one of the things I always liked about like Terry Brooks is I remember reading Magic Kingdom for Sale for the first time, and even as a teenager, it was just such a fun. It was well put together and holds up to time. If you read it now, it still holds up. But it wasn't like you didn't have to slog through it.
Yeah, I haven't read it in ages, but I recall it being my favorite of Terry's works. Actually,
Oh yeah, I think it was his debut. Here comes Mr. Steven Savile. Oh my goodness, here he is. He's walked his dog.
Oh, that's a fancy background you've got going on there.
Yeah, it's from the video game, the Witcher video game.
All right.
And the green screen is right up here. That's where the light is coming in on my window. It's putting it up. I can't see you, Stephen.
From to hell, mate. That's not the light from your window.
I can't see you, Stephen.
Okay, that's odd. Okay, why am I not getting that?
I don't know.
Start video. That might help.
Okay. There we go. There's my old buddy. Stephen? Christopher? Stephen.
Nice to virtually meet you.
And you.
So now, where in the world are you?
I'm in Sweden.
And how early is it getting dark at this time of year?
Now it was like 5:30 tonight.
Jesus Christ.
Sounds
yeah,
right.
wonderful.
I've lived in Anchorage, Alaska twice, so I'm kind of used to some of that.
I also like you're much more organized than me and have a nice advert in the back than you do.
Well, I had this set up for all of my virtual book tour events, and I've just kind of left it there for the next month, just for any other events I'm doing.
Hey, was that your wife I was corresponding with?
My assistant.
Your assistant? Okay. No, I thought I was looking at the signature. I thought didn't know if it was your wife or your assistant. I thought you had the same name. Anyway, I just wondering. Oh my goodness. So what are you up to, Stephen? You're diving off into India here, and what about this? You got a game coming out, all sorts of shit.
Oh man. Okay, so life has been a bit on the odd side. Obviously, I've been doing the role-playing games for the last year and a half or so, and I mean they're crazy. They go ridiculously well on Kickstarter, and people love them. So, having done I think 3 Viking ones, I got approached by a German mobile computing company, and they've just asked me to write a new Viking computer game. So that's my next couple of years sorted out.
All right, I should hook you up with Andy Gavin, man. I bet y'all could get some shit together. Yeah, you know who? Andy started Naughty Dog Games. He sold his interest in that, but long ago. But he's still like heavily involved in the gaming stuff.
Very cool. I've actually an RPG is something I'd really like to do for my new book because it's set in what I'm calling the Fractal Verse. So I worked out this far future, distant past. It includes the real world and has all this physics that I worked out for it, which was a lot of fun. And I want to do some stuff with the Fractal Verse that I wasn't able to do with the Aragon books because the rights for that are all tied up with the movie. But this one, I'm keeping control of it this time around.
I was after I saw that movie before I read the book, and actually I didn't. I liked the movie just fine until I read the book and went, "Hey, she's supposed to be an elf."
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, not only are they not going to make another movie, they can't.
No.
Oh man, I gotta ask, dude. I remember people used to give you a lot of shit back when you were young. I mean, how long did it take for that kind of shit to wear off, man?
I mean, I mean, it is what it is. I published the book so young that's always going to attract a certain amount of attention.
Yeah.
And to be fair, it was the work of a very young writer. I did my best, and but I've learned a lot since then. So, fortunately, social media was not a thing back then, not the way it is now.
Oh my God.
I mean, I didn't get on Twitter until my last Aragon book came out, which was 2011, end of 2011.
Which is why your hair is still brown and not gray.
Well, the beard's going. The beard's going.
Or you even have some, yeah.
No, I just remember because you know how people are, and I remember the only thing I kept thinking it was, man, people are buying this book. If the story wasn't there, people wouldn't be buying this book.
Well,
now, you know what I'm saying?
I mean, it's really hard because art is subjective, and I think writing is perhaps one of the most subjective of the arts, right up there with music. Because, I can use a word to describe something, and everyone's going to see something different in their heads. If I say the word rock, you saw something completely different in your head than I saw. You maybe have some sort of emotional connection to it that I may not. Heck, you might have seen, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in your head when I said "The Rock" instead of "a rock."
I mean, obviously, it's going to be.
I saw The Rock carrying a rock in Iraq.
So yeah, I mean, you can't please everyone. It's just it's physically impossible, and sort of accepting that was definitely difficult when I was younger. That the fact that no matter how hard I worked on a book, someone was going to hate it, and probably a lot of someone's. And that's just natural. That's the way it is. You can find people who don't.
Extra bullshit though that I didn't think you deserved, and I'm like, why are you hating on this guy? And then I mean, he wrote a story that people really liked, and but at the same time, people give Dan Brown a lot of shit. And I'm like, why are you giving Dan Brown shit? He's because he's successful and wrote a book that everybody freaking loves. What? What did he do that's so wrong?
Go visit the website, the davincicroc.com, and look at the, I think, 360 times he stole paragraphs verbatim from another writer. That's why he gets shit.
Well, I've read his other books too. I don't know if he did that with his other books, but they were fun to read. So he obviously can write. I just never understood the amount of vitriol that people give writers. And
well, I mean, it doesn't matter who they are. I mean, if it's Stephanie Meyer or Suzanne Collins or E.L. James or anyone, if they're selling a lot of books, they're successfully communicating to their audience.
Yeah.
And that's not easy to do. If it were easy to do, everyone would be doing it.
Oh yeah.
It's like I saw an article on I was just talking about this on another panel a few days ago on Danielle Steele. Danielle Steele has sold something like 580 million books.
Jesus.
And she's written 170 novels, and no one, and this is so weird to me, no one talks of her as like a great cultural force. No one talks of her as this presence the way that I mean, I don't know how many books like Stephen King has sold. I don't think even he's sold that many books.
No.
I could be wrong on that, by the way.
Well, from my part of the world, it's Catherine Cookson, who was the romance writer who did historical romances in like the late 1800 period, early 1900 period in England, and likewise, I mean, she was like the Barbara Cartland of the time, was producing an incredible amount of books, and they were just selling like mad. You couldn't imagine the success.
You mentioned James, man, and I'm like, I remember I read a few paragraphs of 50 Shades of Grey. Was not my thing, but it wasn't written for me. It wasn't written for me to like. I'm not the target audience. I just was kind of curious because I kept on hearing, all this, all the horrible shit about it, and I'm like, well, let me see if it's that. Oh, not my thing. But I tell you, I wish I could come up with a 50 Shades of Grey and like apologize for my mistakes all the way to the bank and have like 3 movies made and all that. Yeah. Yeah, she must be just a horrible writer to have accomplished all that,
I think there's the argument between like great art and entertainment, and I mean, the thing is, a lot of the people we regard as great artists from the past, like Dickens is a great example, or Shakespeare, were the entertainers of their day, and were writing to put food on the table and all of that. They weren't sitting up in some ivory tower.
Mozart.
And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with entertainment. You know, I've got a great library here in my house with tons of classics that I haven't read, and I would probably feel like jumping off a cliff if I tried to read them nonstop, because if you're trying to read great, serious, intense art all the time, it kind of messes with your head, and it's more than at least more than I can deal with day to day, especially when, you know, world events are intense, shall we say. It's kind of nice to read something that doesn't put you through the ringer.
Right. You know, I mean, that's why I used to read when I was young, or when I was younger, like in my early 20s, and I was doing a lot of physically challenging work, and I'd come home tired and sore, and as opposed to flipping on the tube, I'd read a book. And, I mean, as much as I love Tolkien, man, that was sometimes just too heavy for me to, I was wanting something light and fun and something to enjoy. I wasn't trying to delve into the deep recesses of my soul. I was just wanting to have a little fun. And, for my part, that's what I try to accomplish when I write something.
So, have I told you my E.L. James story?
No, but I'm dying to hear it.
This is typical of my life, right? So it's my agency's 50th anniversary party, and we're all there, PD James, etc., all having a drink, a lovely time, and I'm chatting with Simon Taylor, the editor of Bantam, and mocking a little bit the fact that E.L. James has just announced that she's doing a How to Write book. And it's between friends, it's a joke, right? So we're chatting away, and of course I happen to snipe how obviously the page one is pick up Stephanie Meyer's latest book. Page two, copy plot of Stephanie Meyer's book, but add sex. And the woman in the conversation with us says, well, I personally think E.L. James is a genius. And I'm like, not necessarily the word I think. To which the woman then says, well, for one thing, she's got every woman feeling confident to talk about sex. And they never did that before. And I'm like, Jesus, you went to university. Every girl I ever met talked about sex. It was men who didn't talk about sex. We'd say, oh, yeah, she's all right. And that was it. There was no, deep conversation about sex. So this conversation went on for about 5 minutes. And then Simon says, and by the way, Steve, this is Selena, who bought E.L. James's book for, X million pounds, and has just paid out like £5,000 bonuses to every person at Transworld in the UK who've been doing it. But also, she's the woman who needs to say yes to buy your new book.
Oh my! Oh.
So, shrink ray.
Yeah.
Well, at that point, you kind of have to own it and just like stick out your hand and say, well, I already stuck my foot in my mouth. Do you want to publish me?
Yeah.
That's it. Pretty much, you know what you get.
Yeah. Fancy a shag?
Yeah, no, that one definitely not. But
since you're into E.L. James, fancy a shag?
It was just quite funny though. Of all the people, the person who had to sign off on it.
You have any funny con stories you care to share today, Mr. Paolini?
Quite a few that I shouldn't share, quite honestly.
Well, nobody's watching. Come on.
I was going to say, it's not like anybody.
Just the three of us.
Oh boy, I don't know. The cons are weird. Cons are really weird. I actually really love the conventions because it's something you don't encounter in in everyday life, where you get thousands and thousands of people gathered together who are openly enthusiastic about things. They're active fans of XYZ, and they're not afraid to share that enthusiasm at great lengths with you if you give them the chance.
Yeah.
And that's really, I don't know. There's an innocence to it. There's an enthusiasm. There's something really wonderful about that, and that's, I think, what I enjoy the most about the conventions. But they can certainly be some weird places with all of that. I remember one time I was at a convention and I was going through it was in a hotel and I was going down through like these underground tunnels going to one of the meeting rooms, and I don't know, it must have been, I don't know, 8 at night or something. There are all these people walking down the hallways and they're all changing, they have costumes and stuff. And then right in the corner in one of these hallways and sort of dim lighting, there's a guy wearing one of those inflatable T-Rex outfits.
My son had one.
Okay. And surrounding him is a ring of other people also wearing the T-Rex outfits. And they're all kneeling with their heads thrown back, howling at the guy in the center. And it was just one of those things where you look at it and you go, yep. And you just keep on moving.
Man. But when I went to WorldCon right after I signed with Tor, and it's the first time I was meeting my agent for the first time, and first time I was meeting Lindsay, my editor over there, for the first time. Now this didn't happen to me. This happened to two people I know. 2 days in a row. Of course, George Martin is there. Brandon Sanderson was there. I think you might have been there. Oh, I'm not sure. Were you there 3 years ago at WorldCon? Like you'd remember.
I've actually never been to WorldCon.
Oh, okay. You should go. It's a lot of fun. It's so much centered on literature rather than the cosplay and stuff. It's really great.
Yeah, actually, this year was the year I was going to go. So go figure.
Well, yeah, me too. Of course. And I was going to be the first time I was actually had a traditionally published book. Anyway, after getting entirely too drunk with my agent and my editor, I wake up the next day and I go, and Nicholas Eames is there, Kings of the Wild.
Yeah.
Super nice guy. If you ever get a chance to hang out with him or talk to him, he is just he's a hoot. And I love Nick to death. And Lindsay was actually his editor over at Orbit before she moved over to the tour with Davey. And anyway, so this is going to be his first WorldCon. Kings of the Wild hadn't been out for 6 months or something like that, and he's doing a signing at WorldCon right next to George Martin. So you go up there, and there's Nick, 2 or 3 people in this huge line going. I'm like, oh man, that sucks, dude. Of course, we went to Nick's line and got him to sign a book. But, so the next day, this other guy who was also at WorldCon and lived in the area, actually, Ransom Stevens, he's an indie, and he's a brilliant guy, physicist over somewhere in Silicon Valley. He's one of those guys, when you're talking to him, you can tell he's really struggling to not talk over your head. Mm-hmm. Maybe not you, but me for sure. So, and he has his first signing. He's got a signing at WorldCon, and he's excited until Brandon Sanderson's next to him.
Yeah, it's difficult when you do events like that where I'm fortunate to have very long lines at my signings and stuff, and it's difficult because I did the self-published thing. I did the indie thing back in the day with Aragon with my family, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. I once did an hour-long. This was actually at a Idaho Renaissance fair. I did an hour-long presentation for one person. I don't know who this person is. I don't know where they are in the world. I was in medieval costume. I literally did an hour-long presentation, including readings and drawings.
How old were you?
Oh, God. I was 17 at the time. So
Jesus Christ.
So someone out there got a personal performance like that.
You can definitely remember.
Yeah, I bet he remembers it.
I'm sure. Because the thing is that it was the attitude of the show must go on, right? Someone's in the audience, you're performing, you go up and you do it. It's not actually a convention story, but I do have one good story here from touring. Actually, a lot of them, but so this was when I was touring for Inheritance. So this was 2000. Actually, the book came out end of 2011, but this was 2012 because this was my European part of that tour. Mm-hmm. I actually have never told this story in public for some reason. I think it's because, again, it's the attitude of the show must go on. So my first stops were in Germany, which was going all really well. And then the final event in Germany was in Berlin, and it was in this pre-war theater, which, you know, is pretty rare in Berlin to find something that's pre-war. And it's a really nice old theater. So I was in backstage and I was in the basement, and there was a set of stairs that would go up on the stage, and then there's the audience out in the auditorium. And I'd say there's maybe 400 or 500 people out in the audience. All the seats are filled. And I had a translator and then I had a presenter, and they were on stage performing, sort of warming up the audience, introducing me. And I hear my name said, and the audience starts clapping. And so, you know, you want to get on stage before the clapping stops, because that's just awkward.
Oh, you hear your feet pounding the boards, right?
So to get up on the stage, there was this staircase from the basement that goes up onto the stage, but it was an open wood slat, you know, almost like a ladder. And the wood was so old that it had worn out, you know, concave steps. So I'm going up and I'm wearing dress shoes. And I get about halfway up that ladder, and my right foot slips off the edge of the steps, and full speed, full weight, I ram my shin against the edge of that step. I stumble forward one step and do it a second time on the same spot. So I get myself up on the stage, and I have a pretty high pain tolerance. And you know, so I'm grinning through it. I go, and fortunately for me, we were sitting at a table on the stage, and we start the presentation. And after about, I want to say like 5 minutes into the presentation, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I've hit my shin, you've hit your shin, we've all hit our shins. You know what it feels like, but this really effing hurts. And I look down under the table, and I was wearing jeans. The front of my shin through the jeans is soaked in blood.
Oh.
There is blood dripping down onto the floor. My sock is soaked with blood, and my shoe is full of blood. And so I nudged the guy who was next to me, who was the presenter, because the translator was talking. And I say, you know, hey, look at this. And he glances under the table, and his face goes completely white. And this very concerned German man, you know, and he leans into me and says, you know, do we need to get you to a hospital? And I seriously considered it, but I was like, you know what? These people came to this event, they bought books. I was like, no, I think I can do this. We're good. So we finished the presentation, which was an hour-long event. And then I got up on a table there and I signed every single person's book, did the whole thing, and no one saw what was wrong because the table was blocking the view. And then once everyone was out of the convention, I hobbled back to the hotel and ran a bath, and I had to soak the jeans off my legs. The blood had just dried on. And then I got myself some blood sausage because, you know, it's Germany and that's what you do when you're in Germany. But and my poor publicist, Random House had one of their foreign publicists, foreign rights people traveling with me, Jocelyn. Very amazing woman, no nonsense, super organized, and grew up on a farm. And so when I showed her what had happened before I started signing, she looked at me, she said, "Do you need to go to the hospital?" I said, "Nope." She said, "Good man." I was like, this is the publicist I want to be on the road with.
Oh shit! Oh my god!
But the problem was then, so I ended up with this literal dent down to the bone. But the thing is, this was right at the beginning of the tour, and you know, I couldn't take time off. I really should have gone to the hospital, and I didn't. And then because the next day we flew to the Netherlands, and it was just, you know, nonstop. And one of the stops was in Barcelona, and they have the Sant Jordi festival there, the festival of the books, which means everyone walks. You walk from bookstore to bookstore, and it's this street festival. And so I was hobbling for the rest of that tour, which was Northern Europe, including Scotland and Wales and everything. And then they flew me to Australia and New Zealand. And so that was, I have, at this point, I kind of figure if I haven't shed blood at an event, it's a good event.
Yeah. It makes my story pale in comparison. I was doing a signing with James Barclay and Stephen Erickson. And obviously you're talking about, you know, when everybody comes for one person. So they've all come to see Steve Erickson. I'm sat on one side of him, James Barclay sat on the other. We're chatting, it's really nice. He's got, I don't know, 200 books piled up ready. We've got a few. His publisher comes over and says to us, so guys, do you want a coffee before we start? It's like, you know what? Fantastic. Yes, please. That would be lovely. So away he goes, and he nips around to the Starbucks on the corner, comes back with 4 coffees, proceeds to trip on the floor and wipe out Steve Erickson's collection of books. So all 200 books are soaked in coffee. Dead.
Oh.
Doesn't hit mine, doesn't hit James's. So all these people who've come to see Steve can only buy our books. But again, there are swings and roundabouts.
Oh my God. Last time I was at Pensacon, like I said, that's the last con I did before COVID hit. It was the last day of the con, and this is not anybody wiping out, this is me making a complete ass of myself. Which, for those who know me, know that's not a stretch. It was the last day. It was like right at like 3 o'clock on Sunday, so everything was shutting down. It was or 5 o'clock or whatever time it was. It was like this was the last event on the agenda for the con itself. So they load us all up into a SUV, 2 or 3 SUVs. There's like about 8 of us, and take us down to this theater. And we get out, and it's me. Who else? I know Keith Lee Candido was there with me, and it was heroes and villains, and they didn't prep us for it all. Just gave us the title of the panel that we were on. And so I'm like, yeah, fuck it, I'll just make some shit up. And so I'm opening the door where we're coming in, and we're not expecting anybody really to be there because it's so late in the day, and figure maybe a handful of people. Turns out the whole hall was filled. So that turned out being a good thing. But I'm holding the door for whoever was coming up behind me, and I turn around. And as I turn around, I am literally this far face to face with Admiral Adama himself, Edward James Olmos. And instead of playing it off cool, I went, holy shit! And he was so nice about it that he shook everybody's hand and said, I'm James Olmos, or Jim. I think he called himself Jim. Or whatever. He was super nice, talked to us for a little while, but I was just the opposite of cool meeting this guy.
That's as it should be.
Well, at that same convention, I got really, really drunk and looked up at Jake Busey and said, God damn, you're tall. You don't really get that impression when you're on film. But he's like 6'4". He's like amazingly tall, Jake Busey. Anyway.
Christopher Lloyd's very tall too.
It's my best Christopher Lloyd impression. Where'd you meet him?
Supernova Convention 2012, Australia.
Oh wow.
So and he was running all the young people into the ground and staying up all hours, and I don't know how he does it.
Because he's Reverend Jim, man. Now, Stephen, you got to tell the story about getting. Stephen's told me this story before in private. It's not such a bad.
I dread what's going to come next.
Oh no! Yeah. When you got Douglas Adams to sign a book for you.
Oh man. Okay, so. I hate you.
You're not alone.
So we're going back. Obviously, it's a long time ago now. We're in Newcastle, in the north of England, and as you can imagine, the queue isn't just like out the door and down the street and down the road and round. It just goes on and on and on. And I get there about an hour before it's due to start, and I'm probably the 300th or 400th person in the line. And I'm like, fuck, this is going to be forever. Okay, fine. So I queued up and waited and waited. And it took about 5 hours to get through to him. Got to the front, and he looked at me and he goes, I can't understand why anybody would queue in line for 5 hours just to get my signature on a book. And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, well, it's because one day you'll be dead and I'll be rich. Which is terrible, but even worse when you think he died about 4 months later.
Oh!
It's like, yeah.
Stephen Savile, the angel of death.
Yeah.
But I mean, he seems like the kind of guy that would have appreciated that.
Oh, man, he laughed and laughed and laughed because you just don't say that. I have no idea why it came out of the mouth. It's just like, no filter. Sometimes it's strange.
Yeah. I managed to run into Terry Pratchett at an event one time. Only met him one time, and we were presenting at the same event. We didn't meet then, and then I went to dinner with my publicist after and saw him sitting at a table at the same restaurant. And so I must have been, I want to say I must have been only 23 or so, 24. So I just got myself up and marched over to his table and said, hi, Mr. Pratchett, I wanted to come over and say hi. And he just looked at me in the most grumpy, irascible manner you can imagine. He said, well, why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
And then I said, well, because I'm a big fan, sir. And then everything was okay. But you know what? He could get away with that. He could get away with that.
Yeah, well, I think, what's his name? His good friend. They wrote Good Omens together.
Gaiman.
Yeah, he said he was kind of a grump, kind of a moody guy,
Anyone who writes that kind of humor sees the flaws in the world.
Oh yeah. I mean, you see that in comedians that I mean, my God, can you imagine how cynical Douglas Adams must have been? I mean, Jesus, to be able to see that kind of ridiculousness everywhere.
You do know what 42 is, right?
For what I mean, aside from the outside of the text, no.
It's the price of a pint of beer at his local.
Oh no shit!
Yeah, he took the price of a pint of beer at his local and used that as the answer of life, the meaning, and everything.
Oh man,
42 pence.
Oh man, I'm so glad I know that because I don't know why.
It's a
that
wonderful
just makes me
thing.
Feel good to know that for some reason.
Well, just imagine being the guy who bought an old computer on eBay because he wanted this piece of junk, and it's 10 years after Adams has died. He buys it, he opens it up, he turns it on, and it's Douglas Adams's computer with all the fragments of the books that he never wrote. That's why we have that partial book, because some guy bought it on eBay and found out what it was.
Oh, I never heard about that.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Talk about ka-ching.
The head of the Random House Children's, former head of Random House Children's, was a guy by the name of Chip Gibson. He was the publisher there. Really, really great guy, and he was friends with Douglas Adams. And I remember when Douglas passed away, it hit him pretty hard. But he told me one of the greatest quotes of all time, which both of you probably have heard, which apparently came from Douglas. And Douglas Adams said, when asked about deadlines, he said, "Oh, I love deadlines. I love the whooshing sound they make as they go by."
Yeah, that's advice to live by, I think.
But he was a guy that, he was the same guy that came up with the puddle analogy. You ever heard of the puddle analogy?
Don't think so.
Your water and you're inside of this puddle, and it seems like a very serviceable puddle. Seems like it's made for you, which it was his take on why we see the universe and the world as purpose filled as opposed to just random. It seems to the puddle, it seems like it was made exactly for the puddle. And people still use this explanation, like Christopher Hitchens and some, Sam Harris and some of the great, pretty smart public intellectuals use versions of that to this day. You
can't write Hitchhikers and be an idiot.
Oh no, God.
Although I remember one of his episodes of Doctor Who, and I think it was Tom Baker's era. I could be mistaken, but he had a space pirate with a mechanical parrot on his shoulder in that episode, and you could always tell the episodes that Douglas was working on because they were insane, and it just anything was possible.
Yeah. Okay, and that brings us to 2 minutes before the witching hour. And so before we go, I want to I'll do this at the end of every episode. Have everybody reiterate what they're currently have out, what they're working on, and then we'll wrap it up. So Christopher Paolini, why don't you go first?
Well, my newest book is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. It's big epic space opera, so if folks are interested, I highly recommend checking it out. There will be more books set in the same universe. And you can find me on Twitter at Paolini, all the social media, and of course my website is paolini.net, where you can find lots of news and information.
Mr. Steven Savile.
Oh well, for me, it's been role-playing games for the moment. So it's Trudvang Chronicles, Trudvang Legends, which is just being ported across to 5th edition, and I'm currently writing a novel to go with the game. Technically, I guess it would be a tie-in, even though it's my game and my thing. Yes. So there's that, and like I said, I'm embarking now on the Viking Age computer game mobile platform thing. So yeah, there's fun stuff floating around. And a month ago, I delivered the big fat new thriller to my agent, and I'm dreading what she says about it when she finally reads it.
Awesome. And of course, there's me, Brian D. Anderson. I just had my recent August 11th second book in the Sorcerer's Song came out, Chorus of Fire.
Tilt it.
And of course, during the pandemic, and I'm just wrapping up here in the next couple weeks, wrapping up the final installment of the Goblin Chronicles sequel. I'll be working on wrapping up the other 2 series that as well as finishing third book and A Sorcerer's Song. Hopefully have at least 1 or 2 of those done by late spring, early summer. Anyway, and I want to thank you guys for showing up, and I had such a great time talking to y'all. And I know everybody, the people out there watching this, if it was fascinating for me, I'm sure it was fascinating for them. And again, thanks. And this has been another edition of After the Con.